Okay. Apologies for the small delay. We tried.
Се извинуваме за краткото задоснување, се обидовме да го чекаме господин Поповски, неговиот лед доцни, но ќе успее да дојде потоа за воведната сесија. Значи, почнуваме. Почитувани гости, заменици министерски, Жековски, Шенковски. Дозволете ми да ви...
Sunny Skopje at the first think tank forum of the Western Balkans 2019. On behalf of the Institute of Democracy and the Southeastern European ThinkNet, I'm very glad to have the opportunity to open this event. We are co-organizing with our partner Center for Eastern Studies from Warsaw, supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland, under the auspices, within the auspices of the presidency, Polish presidency with the Western Balkan Summit. Where we are, you were. Where you are, we are going. In search of lost time, we regain our future, Marcel Proust said. It is exactly what this forum tries to achieve through self-reflection, through rethinking our past experience as countries in this process. We aim to bring some fresh new ideas to the process and make it more efficient. Hence, I hereby would like to thank and congratulate and acknowledge, of course, the readiness of the Polish government to undertake this presidency. They are successors, they are predecessors that saw, that understood and grasped the vision of the Berlin process and made it happen. It is even more an added value that for the first time in this format, we are having the think tank forum within a presidency of the Berlin process, and I hope this will be something that will continue in the future. I would also like to thank the Polish presidency that credited the Southeastern European ThinkNet. This network we formed a year ago. We encompassed thanks civil society organizations and individuals from all the Western Balkan countries, plus Croatia and Slovenia, with aim to enrich the process with quality policy ideas and recommendations for the relevant topics. And this event is, I believe, a significant contribution to this goal. At the dawn of the last century, military officer deployed in the Balkans wrote, here centuries do not follow one another, they coexist. 100 years later, it is difficult to say that the region managed to overcome the historical controversies and the discontinuities, but it is also difficult to claim otherwise. The Western Balkan struggles, excels, it threatens, it defies, but it is all something that's happening in a world of rapid transformation. Climate change, geopolitical reshuffling, emerging economic powers, migration, terrorism, these are all things that make the context of today, but the context of tomorrow as well. And maybe in this view, the problems, the challenges the Western Balkan faces may appear to you as something insignificant or small, but the truth is that the chain is no stronger than its weakest links. Our fragile societies, the alternatives of and for EU enlargement, the lingering bilateral disputes, common security challenges, it is all something that is in constant need of commitment, of integrative processes. And I believe that EU and Western Balkan must make these commitments and deliver achievements in order for the process to succeed. And second, to EU enlargement, Berlin process is of course the driver of such an integration. The region experiences insufficient economic growth, slow reforms, social-wise, economic-wise. EU accession has more independent variables than before, as you all know. The region became the forefront of the migration crisis and so forth and so on. So in this sea of uncertainty, the Berlin process is definitely a driver of that develops resilience, that contributes to resilience. It offers policies where there are only intentions. It offers ideas where there is only intuition. The process makes us better. It shows us the way. It shows us that bilateral disputes should definitely not be solved through territorial solutions, but rather through means that acknowledge compromise and reconciliation, as successfully the Prespa agreement demonstrated, and as the Macedonian-Bulgarian agreement for friendship also showed. It shows us it is better to make partnerships with civil society and the citizens rather than with leaders for the sake of stability. It urges us to collaborate, to cooperate in the areas of security, migration, so forth and so on. However, the process loses its potency if the EU enlargement is not credible for the Western Balkan countries. It must be based, of course, on individual merits of every country. The open policy door of EU must take into consideration the commitments of each country separately to tangible reforms, and it must remain open and eventually let us in. Finally, I'm honored to have you as distinguished speakers at this forum. I hope we will have a fruitful discussion, and of course, how to say, this is the first time we are doing a think tank forum within a certain presidency, and as I said, so I'm convinced the discussions we will have, we initiate today, will prove itself worthy for this type of format to become a tradition in the future. Thank you all, and now I would like to give the floor to my colleague from the Center for for the Eastern Studies, Mr. Adam, to take the floor.
Thank you, Marco. Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, deputy ministers, my name is Adam Meber. I represent the Center for Eastern Studies, OSW, a Polish think tank that is trying to understand better, but at the same, our neighborhood, Central Europe, Western Balkans, European Union, but at the same time to work as a bridge in contacts between experts, researchers, scholars, in order to understand us better and bring us closer to each other. We at OSW have been engaged in dialogue with Western Balkan countries for years. I remember that it was just 2 years ago when we had a great conference here in Skopje, which was focused on a topic of cooperation between Western Balkan countries and V4 Visegrad Group countries. So we are happy to have an opportunity to go further within this direction, especially that our meeting today is a first step in preparation for the Western Balkan Summit, which will take place in Poznań in Poland, July this year. We are happy to have experts from different countries, and we are happy to have opportunity to work out some recommendations, papers, analytical briefs regarding an enhanced cooperation between Western Balkans and European Union, Western Balkans and Central European countries when it comes to cooperation, when it comes to integration, when it comes to relations between think tanks and expert community. So once again, thank you very much, Marco. I would like also to thank the Institute for Democracy and the CE in ThinkNet, a consortium of Western Balkans. I would like to thank all you who joined our conference today in order to discuss it today during our main sessions, but also tomorrow during our roundtable workshops when we are able to go a bit deeper into specific topics and work out recommendations for our government on the eve of the Poznan summit later this year. Thank you very much.
Now the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Zharnovsky, will address you. Mr.
Part of this important event. Just a few days ago, of course, it was connected with the European Day. I wrote, I wrote on my Facebook, of course, it was inspired by the European Day. It started as a dream of a few, but it became the hope of many. And we must not forget that on the ashes and on the smoke of the World War, there was a realization of the European hope and the European dream, and the leaders of Europe really explained to us what is the dream of Europe, and what is very important is that the differences should be resolved at the table, not on the battlefield. And why I'm explaining this is because I want to be very frank, very open, that we still have battlefields in the region and in the Balkans. But it is very important that now North Macedonia is a successful story. It's a country that proved that there are actually no frozen conflicts, but there are frozen solutions. And we really work very hard on that. And to have good neighborly relations was the first and the most important topic on our agenda, not only of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but of course of the whole government. And signing the agreement between Bulgaria and then the PESPA agreement with Greece was a really street proof that we really work on this field. And now that's why we are a successful story, and we want to create, let's say, positive pressure of the rest of the open questions in the Balkans. But it is a country that has any open questions with and open bilateral questions with our neighbors. So what does matter today is what we can do now. That is our question. We don't want to be stuck country in the past. We don't want to be captured state. That was what was mentioned in a couple of texts about our country before. So we want to stay on this track, and we will do everything to fulfill our goal for the sake of our citizens and for the sake of our country. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs will, for sure, continue this effort. We don't want to change our past. We cannot change our past, but we want to use that experience to build a really solid future for us as a country, because we really deserve that. And of course, in order to reinforce our process, in order to shape our future, we really strongly need to focus on our regional cooperation, and that we have to do it constantly. In that regard, the development and the promotion of, as I said, good neighborly relations, but also wider regional cooperation is among our strategic priorities. And That's why the Berlin process is very important for us. We see this as an additional opportunity to reaffirm our position and to reaffirm our strategic goals, and so explain to our friends why we need this and why this is so important for us, but not only as a country, but also for the region. The Berlin process is valuable for its contribution and increase, I will say, awareness about the importance of the opening to each other and working towards closer cooperation. That was something that we're really missing in the region. For example, 2 months ago, we have the first visit of the Greek Prime Minister. So can you imagine what were the relations between two neighboring countries when we have this year first visit of the Greek Prime Minister? Today, this morning, we have celebrated 20 years of the relations between International Organization of Migration and Republic of North Macedonia, and that was a very good example to show how the migration crisis in 2015 has been proved that both EU and Western Balkans countries share common interest and that we need each other. And we prove really that if we want to talk about stable Europe, about the security in Europe, we have to talk then about stable Western Balkan, and that we, as I said, we need each other in this direction. So that's why we need to reinforcement our integration process for the sake of the both sides, and by both sides I mean not only regions, countries in the region, but also European Union. I have feeling very openly that we are now in that stage, and I want to be very, very open that we are in the stage that time is priceless, and that we don't have that luxury to waste time. We need to use this momentum, because in other side, if we don't use this momentum, and if Europe does not keep their promises and its credibility, then we will send, let's say, different and very wrong messages, both from the other side to the European, pro-European democratic forces in our region, but also to the other ones who supported nationalism, who supported populism, and of course, we all know that not everybody is happy in the region with this scenario. So I really hope, we hope that we'll have in June definitely a positive message, and that we will start the accession talks. At the beginning, when everyone was talking about why we have to make reforms in judiciary, for example, in free media, we all think that why we have to do that. We have to satisfy somebody from Brussels. Then we realized that we are doing this for our own sake, for the sake of our country, for the sake of our citizens, and that is one very important stage. So we are not now in that stage. We will continue to make and to implement the reforms, not just to satisfy, of course, somebody from Brussels, not because that is on our homework to do, but because we really like to. We have to do that for our own sake, as I said. In the European Union, I don't think that this will be a reward for our efforts, but it will be really something that we deserve, that we work very strongly. It was not an easy task, as you know, and this administration was the same one who has to implement both the agreement with Bulgaria and PRESPA agreement with Greece, and at the same time to, as I said, implement the reforms. It was not easy, but what is different now in my country, in our country, is that we have now a very transparent model of implementing the reforms, and we work together with the opposition. 90% of the laws that it was been passed in the parliament, we work together with the opposition. We voted together, so that is something that is unfortunately not, let's say, something that we can see in other countries in the region. But that's why we hope that will create a positive pressure. We understand, of course, the concerns in European countries. We understand how now the political landscape is in Europe. We understand the concerns about migration. We understand the concerns about Brexit, for example, new EU budget, new elections. But on the same time, we have to understand that, again, if we want to talk about stable Europe, then we have to talk about the Western Balkan well integrated in the European Union. So I don't think that we have time and the luxury to choose between deepening and widening, or between internal reforms and enlargement. We have to do that in a parallel. We have to do that together. We cannot separate these two things, and that is very important, and a very important message that I want to send. So for us, it's very, very important how we will use this time. We want to see our countries, our societies much more democratic, to act finally, to see Balkan acting in a European manner, not in a manner that we have this, unfortunately, not a good image as a Balkan, but now North Macedonia creates this really positive image about Western Balkan, and we want to really use that momentum, and we hope that also Brussels can understand that momentum. So we have learned the lessons from our past. We are more than ready to enter in the next phase. We are more than ready than ever, and really hope that our friends from Poland, from each and every country of the European Union, and from the institutions in Brussels will recognize this momentum. And then in June, we will start our project, our trip together. That does not mean that we will, in June, be EU member, but it means the start of a long journey, and we hope that we will do that together with your support. Thank you very much.
I would now call Deputy Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Szynkowski, to address the audience.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, dear distinguished guests, all of the representatives of the think tanks. I think, Mr. Minister, that the image of Balkans in Europe is not so bad. Especially in Poland, we have already begun in Poznań a week of Balkan culture. It is also the event situated in our presidency in the Berlin process. That is why there are many events organized by the Poznań University in cooperation with our foreign ministry. There are concerts, there are lectures, there are also some cuisine events, workshops for cuisine chefs. So the image, especially in Poznań now, I think, of the Balkans is not so bad as you already said. And I hope that this political image will also be better each week and each month. It's my pleasure to be here today in Skopje. It's my third time during last half a year here in Skopje. And I'm especially satisfied when seeing that the greatest idea that came up after my consultations in the region and here in all capitals of the 6 countries in the Western Balkans, the idea of think tank forum to be accompanying Western Balkans summit, it's entering its final phase. When I was nominated as a governmental plenipotentiary for organizing the Western Balkans summit in Poznań, and also to organize Polish presidency of the Berlin process, one of my main goals was to engage the NGOs, the think tanks, into our presidency as an important pillar of our discussion, because I'm sure that the integration between Western Balkans countries and the Western Balkans countries and the countries of European Union is not possible when it will be only the integration of elites, of politicians. I think that the direction to make the integration bottom up, to integrate the people on the level of NGOs, on the level of think tanks, on the level of civic society, that's the right direction, and without it we won't be able to create a real integration which we want to take place. Having chosen civil society as one of 4 pillars of this year's Poland's presidency in the Berlin process, where think tank forum has been defined as the most significant part within this pillar, I find it very satisfactory to note your numerous presence at this conference and your interest to this initiative. Today we are meeting here in Skopje, but there were of course some earlier discussions that have happened in all capitals of Western Balkans region during last winter and early spring this year, extensively contributing to the scenario of think tank forum and Western Balkans summit itself that is to happen so soon in Poznań. I'm happy that my dear colleague Minister Andrzej Żernowski is with us, and as a host and as one of the true leaders of his nation and in the region, proving to us with his own example that tough decisions sometimes require tough characters of politicians when they are serving their countries, but always they require consultation with the people who are to benefit from decisions taken. Thank you for that. I also welcome Deputy Director General Mr. Maciej Popowski, representing European Commission, that is constantly supporting us in the Berlin process as well in the process of enlargement. You are here to be consulted, to be discussing, to take up a challenge of developing a regional approach to many important topics that involve many of us on a daily basis. You are to learn from each other with this unique opportunity of having in one room experts from Western Balkans, Central Europe and Western Europe. You are to learn about your sensitivities and how they can be addressed to strengthen your common positions. So when you finally reach us, politicians, governments, we would have to see your strength, and despite our tough characters, we have to take your message and sometimes even change our approach. So you are actually to practice how it looks like every day in the EU. Topics chosen for today and tomorrow are to be developed further, and with the regional strong common view, they are to be presented to politicians, governments, our leaders in Poznań, July this year. Just after European elections, where EU leaders will be discussing priorities of future policies, as well as candidacies for future positions in the Commission or Parliament, your strong voice has a chance to substantially influence these decisions. It is very important for my country, for Poland, to continuously support Western Balkans' path towards European integration. And that is exactly why we have foreseen various ways of helping you to be heard in Poznań. Your policy papers are to be read. Your participations in the panels is to be seen and noted. Your questions should be answered. When discussing here in the Western Balkans region your expectations as to the summit that we organize in less than 2 months from now, I have promised you that nothing about you is to be decided without you. We have agreed then that this principle will be valid for each and every aspect of the Balkans summit. And we have highlighted that your role of analysts, critics and important partners is of the crucial importance for developing modern and just policies for the benefit of your compatriots. And I truly believe that these 2 days meeting in Skopje is to help all of us with better preparations for Western Balkans summit in Poznań. Please also help us to prepare well for this summit. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
Finally, we have the opportunity to listen to the European Commission. Luckily, the flight came on time. Didn't, but yeah, on time for the introductory session. So I give the floor to Mr. Maciej Popowski.
Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hate to be late, and I was late, and this is one of these days when everything goes wrong but believe me, it was much worse last week because I was supposed to go to Poznan to take part in the Europe Day celebrations, and on that day exactly some idiot decided to fly a drone over the Frankfurt airport, and it was locked down for 2 hours, and then I had to go back home. But this time I made it. I'm very happy for a number of reasons, but one of them being that Skopje is the place to be these days in the Balkans. If you want to tell a good story, that things actually work, that reconciliation and negotiations pay off, and that you can give an example to the region and beyond. And we are very grateful. We also congratulate you once again for the incredible historic achievement of concluding 2 major agreements with the neighbors that basically paved the way of your country to the European Union and NATO. Of course, we're discussing the situation of North Macedonia in particular here, but in the broader context of the enlargement perspective for the Western Balkan region, and it's a real one. And I know, and probably during these 2 days, I will get a lot of questions about continuity and how steady this policy is, given all the changes that are coming up in Europe. But I can reassure you, of course, it's up to our next leaders, but this issue has been elevated to such a prominent place on the European agenda that I cannot imagine anybody trying to reverse it. And that was, by the way, confirmed by the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, in some of his comments, some of the comments he made after the leaders' meeting in Skopje, Romania, a few days ago. So the perspective is clear. The next steps are clear too. We just have to work hard in different formats, in different configurations to make it happen. So the Berlin process, the format that brought us together today, is a natural complement to the Western Balkan strategy that the Commission adopted a bit more than a year ago, and then it was discussed also by the leaders of the European Union and the Western Balkan countries at the summit in Sofia. Berlin process is an important element in keeping the European flame alive in the region, in building strong regional cooperation in many areas of importance like connectivity, digital, economic development, youth, security, to name but a few. I'm very glad that Poland took the initiative and took over the presidency of the process. Well, I happen to be Polish, so that makes it also easier for me to make our contribution to the process. But it's also a very good opportunity to benefit from a first-hand experience of a country that joined the European Union exactly 15 years ago. I decided at some point to stop using the term new member state, because 15 years down the road it's completely insane. But still a country with a lot of fresh memories and first-hand experience, willing to share with those who are interested. So, of course, the times may have changed, the context is different, the enlargement policy is not equally embraced in all European member states, let me put it that way, but the guiding principles remain the same. So joining the EU is a generational choice that requires a consolidated effort of the entire country. I mean, not only the government or the political elites, but the society at large, including the academic and the think tank community. Otherwise, it will never work. And we will dig into different aspects of the enlargement process today and tomorrow. I think that the selection of subjects or the clusters of issues we will discuss is spot on. These are things that clearly correspond to the main pillars of the Western Balkan strategy, whether it's regional integration, whether it's reconciliation, resilience, security challenges. This is really relevant for the reflection on the place and the importance of the Western Balkans in Europe. And I'm really looking forward to having your ideas, to picking your brains collectively. So we'll spend those a day and a half together. I think I'll once again come back in the speaking role, but otherwise I'm really willing to engage also in individual conversations. Let's say the roadmap is clear, we know what we would like to achieve, but there's always things that may have escaped our attention, whether it's in Brussels, in Warsaw, or other places, and we are in these efforts, in this endeavor together. Our minister spoke of the timing. The timing is so important also, I mean, for your country, but for others too. There is this momentum that we would like to grasp. Let me reassure you, I mean, I may have been late for this event, but the Commission will not be late with this annual progress report. I mean, the enlargement report. It will be released about 2 weeks from now. Makes it very tight for the member states to make up their minds on the conclusions in June, but I hope they will draw the right conclusions. And you know, the Commission has recommended in the past that accession negotiations be opened with North Macedonia today and Albania, and that's what we intend to say again. There's a clear case for both. We're in the hands of the member states, of our ministers, leaders, if necessary. But I hope that when we meet again, many of you will be there, I'm pretty sure, at the event accompanying the summit itself that Minister Szynkowski-Welsenk mentioned, just ahead of the leaders meeting, then there will be a good story to tell. That this notion of optimism and a clear perspective will prevail. Of course, we will get together not only to celebrate or to congratulate ourselves on the job done, because we need to look ahead and we still have a full agenda. But I think everybody is equally motivated to make it a joint success. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, so I regret to say no coffee break. May I just ask the speakers of the first session to join the stage, please? And we are just about to start. Tutaj, ten. Tak. Siadajcie. No. Te trzy pytania. No tak, teraz z tego powiem. Yes, please. Hello. So you please take your seat in the very middle. Yes.
The names will follow.
The names have changed, the names for the
Tak, mamy w sumie nawet, no tak. Okay, dear colleagues, I would like to start as we already are well behind the schedule. So, well, the first session is about Central European countries joining European Union and what are the lessons that could be learned from a process of EU enlargement 15 years ago. Let me start by introducing our panelists. Mrs. Zuzana Grubiesic, who is Secretary General of the European Movement of Serbia and is a former Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration of Serbia. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Michał Korzan, who is founder and director of a Global Arena Research Institute and used to work as a Prague-based Institute for International Affairs as a senior fellow and deputy director for some period of time, and is one of the best experts of Central European cooperation, including V4 cooperation. Thank you, Michał, for joining us. Mr. Łukasz Czarniecki, who is an economist, head of strategic research of the Polish Economic Institute, a state-owned state think tank that is under the supervision of the Prime Minister of Poland, which is aimed at focusing on economic trends and economic indicators and economic cooperation within the European Union. And last but not least, Dr. Kai Olaf Lang, senior fellow of the Stiftung Wissenschaften Politik, the German Institute for International and Strategic Studies. Kai Olaf is a well-known expert, an esteemed expert on Central and Eastern Europe, but at the same time is dealing with European Union integration and enlargement, so he fits the panel great. Thank you all for joining the session right now. And without further delay, I would like to start our discussion with the first questions to Kai Olaf. Kai Olaf, if you could tell us, how has a 2004 Big Bang enlargement of the European Union changed the European Union? What were the benefits and what were the costs of for German and other countries of the West, old Europe, when it comes to enlargement? And because, well, most people argue that the enlargement was a success story. But was it really a success story? And if it was a success story, then why there is such a strong skepticism among societies of Western European countries towards further enlargement of the European Union? What are the reasons behind?
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam, and my thanks also go to the organizer. I'm honored and I have a great pleasure to be here with you in a very fascinating moment. I think it's a very good idea to have this sort of stock-taking exercise and critical reflection of past enlargement rounds at the very beginning of this conference, and it's a particular challenge for me as someone who has a Berlin perspective to be the first speaker. All of your questions are highly relevant, so and they would be the topic for a specific conference. So I try.
You have just 8 minutes to answer all questions.
So I have just eight minutes, and I try to do it in a rather stenographic way. Now, indeed, the enlargement rounds of 2004 and let's say 2007 together, they have profoundly changed the European Union. And I would like to emphasize 3 dimensions. The first one being what political scientists and their jargon call politics. The second one, there are fundamental effects on EU policies. And then there is, I think, an implication for the cohesion of the European Union. What do I mean by that? Now, the first one on politics, there is something like the law of large numbers. So if an organization, if a club increases, has more and more members, decision-making usually gets more complicated unless there is a streamlining and simplification of the decision-making rules. Now, there were some reforms, but I think there was not a great leap forward before the 2004 and 2007 elections. I think the member states which joined the EU in 2007 have mainly not created new divisions, but at some points they have reinforced existing cleavages within the European Union. And in a way, the new member states, and by the way, I use this word, I come from Germany, and we have also neue Bundesländer, new federal states. They joined in 1990, and we still talk about the new neue Länder, and I think in 20 years we will continue to talk about neue Länder. I think the new member states, they have normalized in a way, because they were in a modus operandi of accession, which was an asymmetric situation where they had to adapt and to harmonize. And then after 2004, they quite swiftly changed, because they were also supposed to co-create, to shape the European Union together with others, and also to defend their legitimate national interests. So in a way, the EU became more polycentric due to enlargement. Second, on policies, I think if you look around, we see a couple of very important policy areas where the countries which joined 2004 especially, maybe less those who joined 2007, have given new impetus to the development of policy areas. Especially, to mention it, the Eastern dimension of the EU and Eastern Partnership was a Swedish-Polish initiative, but it would not be conceivable without other allies from Central Eastern Europe that it would have been launched. Western Balkans policy, something which those countries put on the agenda. I think the EU has undergone a sort of securitization due to Eastern enlargement, because for most of these countries, security, domestic security, justice and home affairs, and of course traditional hard external security and geopolitical questions are very important. Russia question, but also energy security. The principle of energy solidarity has been enshrined in the treaties due to especially Polish and Lithuanian pressure. But also, I think, in the realm of the economy, we have countries which are very kind of pro-market, pro-reform, which kind of emphasize the principle of competitiveness. So the old East kind of turned to the new North of the European Union in a couple of years. And then the third dimension about the cohesion of the EU. Certainly, Łukasz will tell us more about this, but in terms of the economy, of course, the disparities are bigger than before, even though we have a sort of tendency towards convergence, which has kind of led to a substantial catch-up process, and some member states of 2004 are now on a higher level in terms of GDP per capita than some of the old members. But if you look at the regions in Romania, in Bulgaria, and the richest regions, capital regions like London and so on, the spread is decisive. However, I think there is also another element to this growing incohesion of the European Union, and that's the problem of governance. So in a way, we have many countries which still have leftovers of the transformation process, corruption, intransparency, and similar things. Plus, a very palpable question, Poland, together with other countries from the region, tries to work here, infrastructure and connectivity of this part of the European Union, how to link it up with the old EU, but also how to link these countries among themselves. So I would say there is a sort of stronger challenge of center-periphery, because in some respects, the challenges we have in many of the countries are quite close to the challenges of the South. Why, and this I think is a key question, why has this success of enlargement, and I belong to those who say it was a huge success in most cases, why has this success, why goes this success along with the sort of enlargement fatigue in the old member states of the European Union? I think this has something to do with the fact that the benefits of enlargement are not distributed equally among member states and within member states among different social groups. So countries like Germany, for example, benefited from enlargement, also in economic terms, but also politically, because we have a zone of stability now as in our direct neighborhood. Whereas from a point of view of Spain, enlargement meant the cake for cohesion funds has to be shared with others. But I think it's basically, again, to simplify it, three elements which have spread this new skepticism towards enlargement. The first one, of course, and in the introductory remarks, some speakers alluded to that, has of course something to do with the situation of the EU proper. So we all know the EU was increasingly busy with itself. It's inward looking due to major crises and necessary reforms which have not been implemented yet to tackle these crises, Brexit and other developments. So the categorical imperative of European policies at the moment is to keep the club together rather than to bring in new members which potentially rise the level of complexity. The second element related to that, I think we have a general EU fatigue in many member states. Even though support for particular policies among the population is quite high, people want more EU, not less EU, but generally we see the emergence of new retarding factors. Eurosceptical parties gaining ground, for example, new veto players, new institutional mechanisms. I'd like to remind us all of the French change of constitution. I don't know when it was exactly, when it was enshrined in the French constitution that enlargements should be, the accession of countries should be subject to a referendum. Later on, I think it was kind of watered down, but this is a clear fact that the domestic debate plays a major role. And finally, and I think that's a key question also, we have a selective perception of past enlargement rounds, of the 2004 and 2007 enlargement rounds, which means that it's rather the leftovers and problems which are perceived and not so much the success, which has to do with media coverage, with the focus on problems and not so much on the positive side. So as an effect, and I conclude by that, I think we have a sort of double shift of framing and a double shift of the narratives when it comes to enlargement. The first one is, I think this big polarity around which European affairs were structured 20 years ago or so, and which was also mentioned by the Northern Macedonian minister, that is deepening and widening, that has faded away. It's not so much the decisive polarity in EU politics, it's rather consolidation and cooperation. We have to solidify the EU of the 27, and we have, of course, to improve our relations with our neighbors because we have an interest that they are more and more stable. But maybe it's not by bringing them in, but by improving cooperation, at least for the time being. I think that's one narrative, the one shift, or paradigm change, if you want. And the second one, at the core of the traditional enlargement policy, was a very much foreign policy-driven aspect. Some say enlargement is the most effective foreign policy instrument the European Union has. And the main rationale and the main motivation was the export of stability. Now, this has also shifted and even turned around because many see it rather as a risky tendency to import instability. So not the export of stability, but the risk of importing instability is very present in the debates. And I think this has explains to a great deal why we have this reluctance. My last sentence is what to do with that, and I think we will come back to that. I'd like to be a little bit provocative. My ceterum censeo in this context is the EU should be restrictive to remain open. So it should do a very well prepared enlargement process, but it has to show that it is credible and that it does not only simulation, but because what is going now on to a high degree is the simulation of enlargement. We pretend that we want to take in new members, but there is no real political will in many member states. So now we have to come back to a more credible and a more solid enlargement policy.
Great, thank you very much. Now I would like to turn to Łukasz. Well, Kai Olaf has just provided us with a picture of problems with cohesion within European Union, but mainly focusing on political factors and from a point of view of a Western Europe. I would like to ask you to provide us with your remarks on economic integration. So how the European Union membership changed Poland and other Central European countries in economic terms, and what were the main problems and challenges of the accession process and the post-accession period, because it is also somehow important. And how do you see the link between internal modernization of Central European countries and the process of European integration? How did it work?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be here. First, I would like to thank the organizers and the panel's hosts for inviting me to the discussion. I will have to look from time to time to my notes because I've got a lot of numbers and figures. And I will focus in my remarks, of course, on the example of Poland. But I think that the convergence path of other V4 Visegrad group countries was pretty similar. So let me start with a statement that joining the EU for Poland and for other V4 countries, it's been a successful story in terms of in economic terms. So we at the Polish Institute of Economics, we have recently conducted a research because we were trying to assess the impact of Poland's membership on different macroeconomic variables. And here are some of results. So if Poland wouldn't have joined the EU in 2004, the Polish economy would have been around 12% smaller than it is now. But we've been here pretty moderate because some of calculations assumed additional growth reaching even 1/5 or even 1/4 of the current GDP of Poland. So if Poland wouldn't have joined the EU in 2004, the value of Polish export would have been around 30% lower. We estimated also the additional amount of foreign direct investment in Poland thanks to EU, and we came to the conclusion that it's about 3,000 euros per capita in the years 2014 and 2004-2017, so which amounts to 110 billions of euros in absolute terms. So I think it's enough. So it's been clearly and really a successful story for Poland and for other Visegrad group countries. But in the context of the second question, I mean, how it worked, what was the main mechanism behind? I think that we usually associate the additional growth of an economic potential in V4 countries with the EU funds, and they were really substantial in the case of Poland because we got since the 1990s because we got also some extra money in the pre-accession term. So Poland received 1,060 billions of euros. And at the same time, our contribution to the EU budget was about 15 billions of euros. So it means we got net 110 billions of euros. But I personally think that the influence of EU money on on the potential of economic potential of Poland and other V4 countries was moderate and is sometimes overestimated. I think that influence of that money it's more to be seen on the level of normal citizens because they see how the infrastructure, public infrastructure was being developed thanks to the money that we got. And in my opinion, much more important transmission mechanism was connected with the fact that joining the EU is joining of an area of certain legal and institutional standards. This in turn is always a positive sign for foreign investors, and of course it contributed to a great engagement of foreign investors in V4 countries, even before joining the EU. And of course, of the incorporation of the Polish economy into global value chains. And of course, I mean the importance of the FDI can be seen on two levels. The first level is that FDI was helping Poland to manage the human capital after political transformation. Yeah? So in the 1990s we had double-digit unemployment rate. Yeah? So and foreign direct investment was really helpful by lowering the unemployment rate in Poland, and of course in other V4 countries too. And of course, on the other hand, it was associated with transfer of knowledge, increase in efficiency, which in turn brought, of course, an increase in incomes. The third pillar was, of course, the accession Poland to the common market. But I won't elaborate here because we don't have the time for that. Let me just switch to the challenges. What could have been done better? I think one of the major costs connected with Poland's membership in the EU is the economic migration. So since at the end of 2007, there were 2 million Poles living outside of Poland in other EU countries, and 1/3 of them were having a higher degree. So I think we can say that Poland's membership in the EU was connected with a substantial brain drain in case of Poland, but probably also in case of other V4 countries. A much less obvious consequence, which resulted from the economic model that was in some sense induced by entering to the Eurozone, was connected with the fact that in the time we developed a high dependence on foreign capital. This may sound like a paradox because I stressed a couple of minutes ago that one of the most important things that we got from EU was the foreign direct investment, but it is not. I mean, what went wrong, in my opinion, was the lack of balance between having good FDIs and development of domestic enterprises. What do I mean by saying that, and what are the lessons? First of all, taking into account that EU will grow, yeah, so that's pretty clear. So this high dependency on foreign capital may be connected with the outflow of some of the FDIs to less developed countries. And secondly, the FDIs that flowed into Poland were connected with transferring activities in the middle of global value chains, and the most money is being earned currently, or has been being earned at the beginning in the area of research and development, in the area of design, or at the end, sales and marketing. And at the same time, within the last 15 years, Poland wasn't able to develop enough domestic countries being able to compete in the markets. Yeah. So I think that, and this is the main challenge for me, for Poland, but also for other V4 countries. That I think that we are facing a kind of a middle income trap in the EU. So therefore, I think that the main challenge is to either attract foreign direct investment with higher value added, or developing domestic companies being able to compete on their own in international markets. Summarizing, I think that there are two lessons, or I mean the main lesson connected with Poland's and V4 being in the EU is following. So I think that Balkan countries can really profit from entering the EU, especially by getting a lot of FDIs, foreign direct investment. But at the same time, I think that they have first trying to attract these foreign direct investments which are connected with the highest value added, or at the same time, or simultaneously, trying to develop local companies, domestic companies, trying to find some support mechanism and helping them to grow faster, better, to be able to compete on their own in the international markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Łukasz, very much for your economic perspective, and much appreciated that you also showed us the traps we have been witnessing after joining European Union. Michal, it is time to discuss regional cooperation, if I may. So, has the regional cooperation within a Visegrad 4, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, supported the process of European integration of our countries? And what was the added value of that kind of cooperation, and what were the strong and what were the weak points of regional cooperation during the accession period, but also just after the accession period? So what, to which extent regional cooperation was needed or beneficial when it comes to Central European countries?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Adam, for a kind introduction, for a great question, and thanks to the Institute and to the Center for facilitating my attendance here. Okay, to your question, we don't have much time, so your question was whether the regional cooperation was beneficial. I would say yes, and we can move on to questions, you know, like to, but I guess that's not what you wanted me to do. So it was definitely beneficial I would say that given the limited political, financial, economic, and social resources that were put into the regional cooperation before the accession and after the accession, I would even say that it's sort of a miracle what the Visegrad cooperation did for the overall integration process. There is a big but, as always. The benefits were not direct. It was not really the way that the Visegrad countries would, you know, in 1993 sit together and develop a coherent common position and coordinated the policies, and they would execute these policies at during the enlargement process and during the negotiations. This is not what happened for several reasons. One of the reasons was that there was a regional rivalry, especially between the Czech Republic and Poland. We should not shy away from saying that. Also, Slovakia was deep in its own political troubles during the Mečiar years, and so it was not that there was some kind of a coherent position. And also, let us not forget that it was especially during the mature stages of the actual negotiations processes, it was the European Commission that very skillfully sometimes played the countries one against each other, so that they're not that strong in the individual chapters. So directly in the very policy terms, I do not see much happening. One exception, and that is the incredibly strong push for the idea of integration in general. So from the very beginning of the Visegrad cooperation, the regional push for saying, you know, we're not here to talk about whether we are going to join the EU, but we're here to talk about when we are joining the EU. This was extremely strong regional push, especially after the kind of a renewal of the Visegrad cooperation in 1997. So let me talk about the indirect value, and that's I would start with something called socialization. That thanks to the gradual development of the interlinkages between various ministries, but also at the cabinet level, but also among the think tanks later on, what happened is that the Visegrad countries were able to not only share experiences, but also to share frustrations, right, and to share hopes, simply to have someone to talk to and kind of keep each other in the loop. So that would be the socialization. Second, equally important was the ability to show to the outside world, but namely to Germany, I hope I'm right, that the Central European countries are not just bunch of rivalry-driven animosities, entities, but that is kind of a region that can talk together and cooperate together. I think this was extremely important to learn to communicate without the Comecon, without the Warsaw Pact, without the Soviet Union, to show that we can do together things that were not imaginable before. In fact, I think that there were fears about the implosion of the region in the early 90s in Western Europe, in the United States, or in Great Britain. So this was the second indirect point. The third was what I call the ramification of policies, and this relates more to the second to the era after joining the EU. The Visegrad Group helped the countries to kind of sail more smoothly into areas that they were not sailing before. For example, in the case of the Czech Republic, the Czech Eastern policy regarding Ukraine, regarding the Eastern Europe in general, and the Balkans to some extent too. Czech Republic couldn't care less up until 2004. I'm simplifying here. But after joining the EU, and thanks to the Visegrad cooperation, thanks to gradually bringing us on board, the Czech Republic became one of the most vocal supporters of these processes. So, and this we could go on and on. I would even dare to say that the Balkan policy and Poland could be cited, or Hungary, Slovakia, and energy security. So these are the points that where the Visegrad Group was instrumental. And the fifth point would be softening the edges, when especially, this is the latest development, especially after the Russian-Ukrainian crisis hit Europe, and the migration crisis too, in a way. The Visegrad cooperation, even though it was not that visible, it helped to soften and kind of soften the edges of the individual politicians. So this would be the five indirect values. I would also add one more thing, that in the what I call the golden years of Visegrad cooperation, which was roughly 2007 till 2012-13, the Visegrad Group became rather stronger advocate, even in terms of real policies, especially the Western Balkans, Eastern Partnership, energy, but also security cooperation. The thing is that the rest of Europe did not really notice it for some reason, or it was bothered by it in a certain respect. So for some reason, when the migration crisis hit, the overall image of the Visegrad cooperation, and deservedly so in a way, got really bad. Last thing I would like to say, when we spoke about the challenges and what the future holds for us, holds for us. The Visegrad Group, if you look at the 25 years of its existence, the Visegrad Group is kind of an empty. I don't mean it in a bad way, but it's kind of an empty box where you can kind of wish the Visegrad Group to be anything you want. And lately, we can see that there is a lot of tendency to wish for the Visegrad Group to be slightly anti-integration vehicle for several politicians. So basically, I think we're now facing a period of once again redefining what the Visegrad Group is going to be about, and this is going to be a big task for the future.
Great. Thank you very much, Michal. Now I would like to ask Susanna, well, what practical lessons could Western Balkan countries learn from Central European experience? Well, we have been listening to 3 presentations, Kai, Łukasz, and Michal, and well, they discussed very different aspects of European integration, a political one, economic one, a regional cooperation, and well, certainly, these are 2 different regions. You cannot copy-paste probably, but what lessons could be learned by Western Balkan countries when observing the process of European integration of Central European countries?
Thank you very much, Adam, for your questions. I would like to thank organizer for inviting me here. I'm honored to be in Skopje after a long time and to see the difference myself. So I'm very happy to be here. But before I start answering this question that we debated over the years, what lessons can we learn from previous enlargements, what are similarities, differences, etc. I would like to start with some points about enlargement, because this is the most pressing issue for us in the Western Balkans, and it's off the table completely now because of the European elections debate. So nobody is daring to mention enlargement, not at all. It's like a forbidden word. Even the Commission will postpone publishing progress reports after the elections, not in April, but at the end of May. So this is the atmosphere. And what else? I brought one example or 2 examples. For example, leaders' agenda, strategic agenda 2018-2024 for the summit in Sibiu in Romania. The first draft, there was a sentence under the subtitle "Projecting Our Values, promote Europe as a model of cooperation and keep our door open for those who want to join our family." Good. But in the final version of the leaders' agenda, this sentence was deleted. Why? Such a vague sentence without mentioning enlargement, without any commitment, was deleted from the leaders' agenda. Unlike that, in the Warsaw Declaration on the reunification of Europe, and I will quote the sentence which we want to hear from every European capital if possible. European integration of the Western Balkan countries should be seen as a process of consolidating Europe and must remain a strategic political objective for the EU. Enlargement, underpinned by a merit-based approach, is the most effective policy of supporting reforms, forging political stability, boosting economic growth, and ensuring security and good neighborly relations between the countries aspiring to the EU membership, as well as between the EU members and aspirants. So this is something we would like to hear from every single European capital, I mean from the member states. But I know it's not possible right now. Speaking about Visegrad countries and the Big Bang enlargement and the whole process back then, we have to keep in mind that it's been 15 years on, so some things have changed. The EU itself has changed. The Western Balkans has changed. The process of enlargement has changed. Everything is different now. What we can learn from before is, first of all, consensus in your societies in respective 4 countries.
there was a consensus about European integration, about Euro-Atlantic integration. We cannot witness that in all Western Balkan countries. I'm not talking about other countries, I'm talking about Serbia. There is no basic consensus about the European integration, let alone Atlantic integration. The support for the EU in Serbia is now around 50% only. It was at its highest in 2009, it was 72%, now it's 50%. So we can debate why is that. I will leave it maybe for the questions, or there are some other panels and tomorrow roundtables which will go in that analysis why the support is lower than before. And as for NATO, it's single digit, it's below 10%, which is a paradox. In 2003, only 4 years after the bombing, the support for NATO integration in Serbia was around 30%. Now it's about 9 or 10%, depends who's doing the survey. But there is one latest survey from the International Republican Institute, which covers almost the whole region. So it presents clearly the doubts and the doubts of the young generation, especially in which direction the countries should go or not. Another thing that we can learn from V4 is that credible reforms pay off. We can see the transformation of the countries. The transformation started to happen before the accession and continued in the membership. So you mentioned the case of Poland and the convergence. Poland is now at around 70% of the EU average, right? And Western Balkan countries are at around 1/3 of EU average. And with this pace, it will need like several decades, let's say, to catch up with other EU countries, particularly EU 15. And one other thing is also important, that our GDPs of all 6 Western Balkan countries, they equal GDP of one Visegrad member state of Slovakia. So this is where we are. And that's why we need a lot of assistance. I'm not talking about material assistance only. I'm not talking about funds. I'm not talking about money, to put it simply. I'm talking about all sorts of assistance so that we could be able to catch up with all other EU countries, with our neighbors first, and then with other. There is also one thing that we can learn, that is regional cooperation. Of course, we don't have such an alliance in the Western Balkans like Visegrad Group. We have an attempt to form sort of alliance, political alliance, Craiova Group with Serbia, Bulgaria, and Romania, but without other Western Balkan countries, it's not the real deal. So we need our neighbors from the Western Balkans to join this alliance, and so as to become the real political and economic and other type of alliance. So regional cooperation is important, but let us not neglect bilateral disputes, because we have over 60 regional organization and processes for the Western Balkans, with the Western Balkans, and still bilateral issues remain unresolved, more or less. So let us deal with bilateral issues as well. So I saw in the program that is the topic of one round table, and I'm glad that the attention will be paid to bilateral issues as well. What we have now, what's left for the Western Balkans is the Berlin process only. So it has managed to fill the void in 2014, when enlargement was also put off the table. So we are grateful that the process was initiated, and we are grateful that Western Balkan 6 are now in partnership with EU 9
countries, and Poland will organize the summit in Poznan. We will talk about it in depth, I'm sure, during this conference. And the Berlin process is, of course, not a substitute to enlargement. It can only add the value to the enlargement process, and it should be given a new meaning, a new essence now, because connectivity agenda is put back where it belongs, into the enlargement. We deal a lot and we talk a lot about the projects within the Berlin process, but someone has to do a fair assessment of the results. It's been almost 6 years now since the process has started. So let us see what projects were initiated, in which phase they are. I'm talking about infrastructural projects. About 31 project has started. So let's see where they are now, how much money is delegated to the process itself, etc., etc. So one fair assessment of the process is necessary as well. So my final point will be about this fatigue that you mentioned, enlargement fatigue. Of course, there are many types of fatigues, social, economic, etc. So enlargement fatigue is one of them. But when the enlargement fatigue meets the commitment fatigue in the Western Balkans, precisely commitment to reforms, to the rule of law, first of all, then we are in not so envious situation. So it's easy to get a malaise, to get some sort of fatigue, but it's more important to stay committed to reforms and to deliver, not because the EU asks us to deliver, but because our citizens expect the government to deliver what's promised. That's all.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for sharing your profound knowledge of EU integration from 4 different perspectives, and thank you very much for being critical, because discussing challenges and problems is something we have gathered here in order to discuss challenges and how to look for a way out. Now, in fact, according to agenda, we should be concluding our session, but I would certainly like to ask the audience to ask questions or maybe voice some comments if you wish. So, anyone? No questions? Okay, so, it's very good news indeed, because we are about to conclude our session. So you will have, if there is no one to ask the question, you will have time to discuss with our speakers, or maybe the speakers would like to share some additional comments. Kaiolas, you were the first one to speak, so maybe you would like to react to what was said afterwards.
Yeah, I basically agree to most of what has been said. Maybe just a little bit of add-on or of questions also on the economic front. I mean, migration is certainly a very important issue area. Migration and demographics. I was thinking about that, and when you said what you said, maybe this brain drain problem. Maybe one could argue that the brain drain would have been similar or even worse without having joined. Yes. So look at countries like Ukraine or some of the Western Balkans countries. All of them. Yeah? So it's substantial, and it's a real challenge, even though formally they don't have access to the single market and on all of the 4 freedoms. So in a way, so what to do about that? I think the Baltic states were all heavily affected. I think Lithuania lost more than 1/5 of its population after 1989. But Estonia, I think 2 years ago, for the first time, changed the equation. So they had a positive migration saldo. So what did they do, and where are the best practices to revert it a little bit. Also, by the way, this migration was and still is a big issue in the old member states, Brexit. And I remember the debates in Germany about the 7-year transition period. Germany did not open up its labor market and was heavily criticized for that. I think with the benefit of hindsight, that solution was not so bad, because we have liberal economies like the British one who didn't manage that politically. And in Germany, the transition period helped us that the Eastern enlargement was not instrumentalized on the domestic political front. EU Eastern enlargement, there was a consensus also in Germany due to that. And now when it has reverted, we would be happy to get more specialists, for example, from Poland. The consensus, I think, the consensus thing, Susanna, you mentioned, is very important. I remember an interview by Mr. Kłakowski, who was the first chief negotiator of Poland, immediately after the start of the negotiations. And then he was asked kind of, where are your toughest interlocutors? Is it the Commission or the member states? And he said, you will be surprised, in my opinion, the toughest partner in my negotiations is Polish society. Yeah. So I have to find a sort of domestic support for what we do. So that's and the cross-partisan consensus is certainly key. And then on, we were chatting a little bit around this during lunch, Adam and Michał and me. Visegrad as a sort of framework, bringing the countries closer to EU. I think there was a certain attempt by the Commission and by the other member states to differentiate between the countries, and the regatta principle, merit-based approach, the regatta principle was not the convoy, the great one, was the model. However, de facto, there was a clear assumption, at least in Germany, which was key for the whole process, that there would be no enlargement round, no first enlargement round without Poland. And some German politicians at that time said, our equation for enlargement is 1 + 9 - X. So Poland in any case, then 9 others, but maybe not all of them. But without Poland, it makes for political reasons no sense. And in a way, I think Poland was aware of that, and so this regatta principle was not as tough as it could have been.
I forgot to reiterate how important is the next summit in June. And our hope is that both Albania and Macedonia will give the green light to start accession negotiations. That is why the European movement in Serbia initiated a petition and gathered 85 civil society organizations from the region, and the petition was signed by prominent individuals as well, and sent to all European institutions and member states. So we advocate giving the green light for start accession negotiations for Albania and North Macedonia, because they deserve it, and that would be a good message for the region. That's a symbolic act. It's not like they will become member states tomorrow. It's a very symbolic act, but very important, so that they can know when they will start accession negotiations.
Great. Thank you all for your interventions. I feel, well, it was just the first session. I think it was a splendid kickoff, because a lot of points have been risen. We have been discussing the success, but also the challenges, opportunities, and it is great we have today afternoon and all day of tomorrow, especially when we are meeting in the round table sessions to discuss the topics in a more detailed way. Thank you very much for joining us here, and we deserved a short break. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Can I have your attention? Thank you. Thanks. Hi, my name is Isabel Ioannidis. I'm a policy analyst in the European Parliament's Research Service. I work in a directorate that looks at impact assessment and European added value. And in parallel, I'm a senior research associate in the Institute for European Studies at the Free University of Brussels. So I'm based in Brussels. This plenary session will look at EU enlargement and is more looking at the future. So we're looking at the perspective for EU enlargement for the region. And we have a remarkable panel of experts to discuss this with. Starting from your left, going right, Mr. Popovsky, who does not need any introduction and who's already made his position clear, so I'll have to ask him a very controversial question. Then we will have Matteo Bonomi, who is a research fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Rome, followed by Adelina Marini, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of a blog that looks at global politics and also at the Western Balkans, and it's called euinsight.eu. And then we will have your very own Zoran Nechev, who is the head of the Center for European Integration at the Institute for Democracy. And many thanks for organizing this wonderful event with the Center for Eastern Studies. And last but not least, Yannis Armagolas from ELIAMEP, where he is a senior research fellow, which is the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. And he's also an assistant professor at the University of Macedonia in Thessaloniki, Greece. So in the first panel, we already heard about the problems with pushing forward for the EU enlargement agenda. We heard about an EU that's introspective. We heard about EU fatigue inside the EU, but there's also the EU enlargement fatigue within the Western Balkan states. We heard about a domestic agenda overtaking in the EU member states. And ultimately, this hurts EU credibility. It hurts it in the region. It also hurts it in our own member states. I think what's really ironic about the situation today is that this whole Berlin process was set up at a moment when the European Commission kind of took a back burner position with a commission that wanted to be more political and concentrate on very specific issues. So we saw the member states activating themselves, and now it's sort of the tables seem to be turning around, and the momentum is coming more from the European Commission and more questioning from the member states. And this region seems to be constantly at crossroads trying to manage these political momentums. So I wonder, Mr. Popovsky, today, what can the Commission concretely do to move the EU enlargement forward in this climate from the EU member states?
Thank you. Look, a classical or a textbook answer from a European Commission official would be more of the same. But I'm not going to leave it at that. You mentioned the momentum and the changing roles of the Commission, the member states, but a lot has happened since 2014, when, by the way, Commission President Juncker simply stated the obvious, saying that there won't be any, enlargement will not happen during the mandate, because he knew it wasn't going to. But then Western Balkans came back on the political map for a number of reasons. a real eye-opener was the migration crisis. I mean, the peak of the migration crisis in 2015, 2016, and everybody suddenly realized in many countries basically not interested in the region that there is something's wrong. Something can happen. Of course, it has also impacted the perception of the region in a negative way. Because I'm always trying to explain also in public that, you know, all those bad things that you associate with the Balkans are not of their own making. I mean, you have terrorists and you have radicalism and illegal migrants wherever you look. I mean, it's not something inherent in the region. But it put the Balkans back on the agenda. On top of that, that is more recent, came the issue of foreign influence or foreign meddling. I mean, just to recall the attempted coup in Montenegro, but there are other ways of influencing the political life, which is quite worrying, and this is something that our heads of state and government basically woke up to. And President Tusk refers to that quite often, saying, you know, if we don't do our job properly, and if we don't make this European perspective real, somebody else will come in, because nature abhors vacuum. So against that background, 2 years ago, the Western Balkan strategy was announced. As I said in my introductory remarks, I don't think it will change. It has really become a flagship policy of the European Union. So the next Commission, of course, the next Commission is free to decide on a number of things, but you know, certain parameters don't change overnight. It's too serious to be abandoned. This policy is too serious to be abandoned. Of course, it all comes with strings attached. And of course, we are very clear in our minds, and also in our statements and reports, where we are heading. But the conditions are also clear. And when you look at the substance of the accession negotiations, on the preparations for the accession negotiations, there's the striking centrality of the famous chapters 23-24, everything that has to do with the rule of law, independent judiciary, with fundamental freedoms. And this is not going to change. And you can always turn the argument around and say, you know, but there are issues around the rule of law in the member states of the European Union as well. But I would say, well, one more reason to be quite fundamental about it, because we don't want to create any additional centrifugal forces. The same is with the reconciliation, which is an issue which I'm sure we are going to come back to. We don't want to import any bilateral disputes. It has happened in the past. We know what the price tag is and how difficult and painstaking it is to deal with the issues once they are inside. Of course, everybody thinks of Serbia, Kosovo, but it's not the only one. This is probably the most difficult, most challenging, most visible issue, with a lot of negative developments as of recently. But we really, and we're going to repeat that in the enlargement report on the annual package in a couple of weeks from now, that we expect all the bilateral issues to be solved in a legally binding way ahead of any accession. Let me be very clear on that. And finally, it's the whole reform agenda, and we are there to help. So we are not going to impose things, but we are going to help move ahead with regional integration, with digital agenda, with foreign investment. This is, by the way, also a way of, if not stopping, because probably we are not in a position to stop it, but to mitigate the brain drain from the region. So if there is more investment, more jobs, more opportunities for the young people, they will be less inclined to go somewhere else. And this is very much on the table when it comes to the Berlin process and our role in the Berlin process. We are simply trying to match our programming with the big political priorities defined jointly with between our own member states, our own leaders, and the Western Balkan six. This is going to very much shape the political agenda of the next Commission after the European elections.
Well, Matteo, I mean, these are challenges and positions that we hear regularly. We need reconciliation, we need more rule of law, and we need more investment to ensure that people stay in the country and invest in their country. And they're noble objectives. But what can we do more concretely for the European Union to be able to move forward on these issues? Because it seems that we've had this on the agenda for at least 16 years now, and things are not moving. Do we have the right tools for this? Do we have the right money for it? What is missing?
Thank you, Isabel, for your question. I think our primary role as political analysts is to try to state some inconvenient facts. Because if we don't take them seriously, we risk to become victim of the situation and of our reading of the situation. So I will try to make 3 basic points. First, I think we should say loudly that the current instruments applied by the EU to the Balkans, which has been at least partially successful in Central Eastern Europe, have failed to deliver results. And this is not realistic to think that they are going to produce the desired outcome in the future. And the idea behind the European perspective for the Western Balkans was for economic reforms in parallel with progressive adoption of EU law activities and principles, to create functioning market economy, to strengthen democratic institutions, and to pave the way to EU membership. Things have turned out differently, and the expectation that this country would have gradually converged towards EU economic and political standards have not been met. This problem can be exemplified very well if you look at the economy of the region. In this regard, it's enough to say how Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina are in the group of countries worst off among all transition economies in terms of GDP recovery and income inequality. Both countries have not still reached their real GDP level of 1989. The rapid market opening and integration with the EU market, which has happened since early 2000 and has brought some foreign, mainly EU capital into the region, have primarily fostered domestic consumption, but without affecting enough economic modernization and economic restructuring. This economic model has led to insufficient job creation, continued industrialization, and widening of trade deficit, together with rising public and private debts. My second point is that not only does the EU currently lack of instruments to transform the region, but the status quo is not an option either. And this is because there is no status quo in the region. There is not stable status quo in the region. The lack of progress with the passing of time simply makes things worse off. And we are assisting of a slow but incremental exhaustion of energies and resources in the region. This is clear, for instance, with the EU offer of membership, which after 20 years appear as having almost entirely exhausted its potential to act as a catalyzer for domestic demand for change. But it is even more evident if we look at economic, social, and political outlook for the region. According to recent estimates, it could take even 200 years for the region to converge towards EU average GDP per capita. This simply means that this country have not been able to set in place a process of convergence with more developed world. Moreover, the region is experiencing a sharp and unprecedented process of environmental deterioration, with rising temperature, forest consumption, and air pollution beyond any acceptable standards. And finally, probably the most dangerous structural change is demographic trends. The process of the population and outwards migration of the region not only will continue, but will probably accelerate. And these have not only serious economic consequences, reducing growth potential, making less, having less human capital here, and have less sustainable public debts, but also political consequences, because and the psychological consequences, with people pushed away, with people leaving instead of voting, exiting the country instead of engaging, and spreading the sense of that people here live in a kind of failed society. Moreover, the European perspective, the only thing that was legitimizing at least the illusion that there was some status quo in the Balkans, is today openly challenged. The EU, in fact, after 10 years of multiple crises, has become an open question, and we don't know what it will be in few years. And so in this context, we cannot take for granted that neither the nature of the EU nor the promises coming from the EU to the region. And so it's not only the status quo that is deteriorating, but is also the illusion of the status quo that is fading away. And we know well how much the impression of the status quo is fundamental to keep things politically manageable, and what happens when this impression disappears, and Kosovo is just the latest example in this. And this fading away of EU perspective, together with an increasing awareness that there will not gonna be better normal life for several generations, of course opening roads for alternative. And this alternative tends to be, as a rule, populist and authoritarian. So my third final point is, okay, there is no transformation, no stable status quo, but how dangerous is the situation here? How bad can things go? We could say it is better not to discover it, but we can also make a more cynical assessment. We can say that the situation here is not particularly dangerous for Western Europe. The political centrality of the Balkan is not there any longer. There is going to be some competition, but not very important. Local players can still play the East versus West, but without great success. And even if they turn their back to the EU, they decide to commit suicide. The main victim will be their citizen, without major strategic implication for the EU. Well, whereas this could be partially correct, I think Brussels and the EU find themselves in a kind of paradox here. The less the Balkans are relevant, populated, contended, the more the failure of EU action in the Balkans will be bombastic. In fact, no other region in the world has, in no other region of the world, the EU has made such a huge ideological investment. In no other place, the EU has been so intensively present with its military and civil missions. In no other region, and no other region in the world is already so deeply connected and integrated with the EU as the Western Balkans. Against this background, the fading away of the importance of the region mirror the fading away of the importance of Europe and the unifying role that we imagine for the European integration project. And this crisis of EU transformative power in the Balkans, EU inability to complete integration of states that have the population of medium, small city, that altogether count for 3.5% of European population, moreover, without even having to face a major geopolitical rivalry, it's a major crisis for the EU itself and another full chapter of EU multi-crisis. So what is the way forward? Just two really brief remarks, if I have time. I think first, keep in mind the broader picture, in the region and in Europe, because problems cannot be solved in isolation, but as a part of a broader strategy. And this broader strategy, this broader picture, should be about not only the Western Balkans, but about where we want Europe and the EU to be, let's say, in 10, 15 years from now. In this regard, imagining a core Europe that gives up with the Balkan, that maybe leaves behind all Southeast Europe, and why not some other peripheral part, I think appear today not as part of a solution, but more as a part of current problem of the European Union, and another driver of internal fragmentation and fragility. My second point, of course, now it's fundamental to open accession negotiation with North Macedonia and Albania in June or in September, or when it will be, but it should be done as soon as possible, in order not to explicitly close the European perspective for the region and continue to do things together. But however, this is not enough. The member state with the new commission should start seriously rethink the integration tool they have applied to the region. And this new tool, I think the most fundamental thing that they should bring is more funds for the region. There should be some scheme to gradually open structural funds with an approach of more for more. And money are fundamental, especially now, because with all uncertainty about the nature and the future of the European Union, you cannot really commit through statement. And to show this commitment, money are fundamental. And of course, money are fundamental to try to invert these structural trends and at least try to do that and try to reinvigorating the middle class in the Balkans. That of course is not something that can guarantee democracy. Democracy is not something automatic, but it's a necessary precondition to try to establish it. Thank you.
So the EU's implementation and engagement has been uneven, but we can move forward with two ways. We keep in mind the broader picture, and we rethink our tools and put more money for engagement. In Brussels, one could argue, and it is argued, that commitment from the region has also been uneven, and that it's a project of joint responsibility. So from that perspective, does some of this EU perspective for enlargement is therefore also in the hands in the region, and what can the region then, Adelina, do to help move their own perspective of enlargement forward?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me here. It's been quite some time since I last were in Skopje, and it's really delightful to be back. Matteo said several points which are also central in the way I see things. And it's for a long time, the elephant in the room has been the rule of law, including in our European Union. So the problems that we have with illiberalism, like a very deliberately stated policy of the Hungarian Prime Minister, but not only Hungary. We have a slide toward authoritarianism, illiberalism, and other problems with democracy and rule of law in many of the so-called new member states, which actually poses the question what to do with enlargement policy. Are these criteria that have been applied still valid? So if you imagine just for a second that if we continue the same way with enlargement policy, nothing changes, and let's say that in 10 years, which is too optimistic, just don't take me for my word, all the Western Balkan countries join the European Union, then the fragile democracies in the EU would be a majority. So what would happen to our European Union, which is founded on liberal democracy, rule of law, and this is the backbone of the European Union. So we really have to think about how to make rule of law sustainable within the EU to be able to export this or support such reforms in the enlargement countries. I think that beyond that, and this is not a small problem just to understand each other, but beyond that, there is also another problem for enlargement, and I think that the Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Zhirinovsky, just hinted about it, that he's aware, and these countries are aware of the obstacles that are in front of them. But I would just like to outline them so that we're clear. Now the Union is of 28 member states, maybe soon of 27, we don't know that yet. But to be able to function properly, it will have to reform itself. The treaties need to be changed to adapt so that the Union could work more efficiently. But if you mention the word treaty change now, in this environment, you would get, no, we're not doing this. I think that any treaty change is not foreseeable in the near future because of the heterogeneity which is now in the European Union. No political agreement about that. So from that point of view, I'm quite pessimistic about future enlargement, whatever, until we consolidate within the Union, and for their part, the enlargement countries should do their part, so that the process could become again trustworthy. There's also another, I think, very important question that both the EU and the candidate countries need to answer. And I think Matteo just touched upon this. What kind of a union do these countries believe they will join? Do they know what kind of a union is that? Do they foresee being members of the euro area? Do they foresee common defense? Like, for example, it was, I think, a couple of years ago, I asked, it was just when the PESCO was being developed and was being introduced, and I asked the Serbian president if he knows about that and if he would be supportive about that, and he never heard of the word PESCO. So I don't think it's fair when we develop certain policy in the EU that we do not discuss them with the candidate countries and ask them, would you like to be part of these policies or not? Would you like to be part of an energy union? How deep integration would you foresee? This is very important for the Union itself to know what kind of countries are coming again. Are they going to be Eurosceptic? Are they going to be for deeper integration? I think these are very, very important questions which need to be debated here as well, because the experience that we've had with previous enlargements was that the enlargement process, the negotiations, is a very technical process. So nobody actually among the people understands these technical things, chapter 1, 3, 23, whatever. But if you pose a question, and I think that it would be very healthy for the democratic legitimacy of EU enlargement and EU accession, if we look at it from this perspective, for peoples here and the citizens in these candidate countries to democratically, legitimately decide what they want from the EU. Like I said, just not to repeat myself, what kind of a union do you want to join? And what kind of foreign policy? Would you be in support of sanctions against Russia, for example? Would you support the efforts for negotiations with Iran, or these sort of things? I think this has to be debated here now as well. And these countries need to be included in the debating process with the EU together, because foreign policy decisions, defense, these sort of things affect us all, not only us as a European Union, but also the candidate countries. So I think that although it may seem quite pessimistic, there could be some common policies that I'm sorry to see that haven't been deliberated, but the French president, for example, had a very good idea to focus on education and culture as a tool to sort of continue the construction of a European identity. And I think that we in the EU should do that, more integration in the area of education and culture, but also in candidate countries. And education should be more EU values oriented, because otherwise we would risk to be constantly in that loop. For example, now you have a government which is pro-EU, pro-democratic, progressive, but then what kind of a government would come? The same happened in the EU, so in some countries. So we have to make sure that we share something in common. If we still agree that the Article 2 of EU Treaty, which explicitly outlines the EU values, is still valid for us. Is this what is common to us? Then we have to ingrain these EU values in all of our citizens. We can do this only through education. Otherwise, our project is doomed. The EU cannot function if these EU values are not taken seriously. And like I said again, the more it enlarges toward fragile democracy, the more at risk the Union itself is, which is not good for any of us. So this was the message I wanted to take to you.
It's a rather gloomy panel so far, I have to say. And now, you know, I'm moving to someone who's from a country that has taken the leap and has moved very courageously to solving an issue that has been made a key issue for advancing its enlargement perspective. I have to say I'm of the same opinion as the Deputy Foreign Minister. I think the EU can walk and chew gum at the same time. It can enlarge and widen. And if we talk about opening accession negotiation, I think everyone understands that this will take time in the course of time, and maybe setting deadlines as was done by the Commission and proposing possible dates at which it will enter is possibly not the best scenario to be following. But given these pessimist views that are coming from this panel on EU perspective, how do things look from Skopje, and what does Skopje expect, and how would you see things developing then?
Thank you, Isabel. Well, the expectations are well known. Date by the end of the year to start accession negotiation. And I really do like the sentence that you said, taken the lead, but it's just temporarily, and we have taken the lead even before. Let's not forget that we were, let's use the jargon, front runners. So we have signed the Stabilization Association Agreement 6 months before the Croats. And now the Croats are in the EU. We are still haven't started accession negotiations. So we have taken the lead even before, but this was not recognized with opening or moving forward in the whole accession process. So we need to see actual delivery on the other side and giving us a date to start accession negotiation. Regarding the topic of the panel, I would say in order to project the future, we need to reflect on the past and not to repeat the same mistakes that the EU did in the past. And I will make 2 points on these issues. As we are ahead of the EU elections and the establishment of the new EU Commission, I would start by avoiding even stating the obvious sentences like Juncker did in 2014. Although we all knew that was completely correct, and none of the countries can become a member in 5 years, it had a detrimental effect on let's say, on the leaders of the region to implement reform and even give strength to those which are against the whole project. And I cannot buy the story about let's first consolidate and then we will enlarge, because it was exactly those words that Juncker used back in 2014, and since then EU did not consolidate. Even I think now it's even bigger mess than it was in 2014. In addition to the internal dynamics of the EU, the EU surrounding became even more volatile and uncertain, be that the Arab Spring, which resulted in a period of protracted turmoil, the conflict in eastern Ukraine, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, and the Western Balkans and Turkey were plunging in a period of serious democratic backsliding. Therefore, what the Western Balkan needs from EU as a way to move forward in the whole enlargement process is a bold leadership and a vision of the new Commission, as our European founding fathers had long time ago, for finishing the projects we tend to call the unification of Europe and continental integrity. So the efforts made by Juncker to create a more political commission did not translate in independent foreign policy conducted by Commissioner Hahn and the High Representative and Vice President Mogherini. EU's action in the enlargement countries remained more so than even piloted by the member state capitals. Even conflictual. If we take the example of Serbia and Kosovo, we can see a real conflict between what foreign policy conducted by the High Representative and what some certain, let's say, very important influential member states are pushing in the region, especially on this issue. So staying united, at least on the institutional level, so among the Council and the Commission, in a more complex world, as it is one of the guiding principles of the 2016 EU Global Strategy, was somehow replaced by a postmodern version of the 19th century European balance of powers politics. And we need to see a change in this perspective. So in my regards, especially having the political momentum in mind, with all the forces within the Europe, I think the Commission needs to take over the lead in the enlargement process, and to finish the unification of Europe, both in terms of process and values. The EU must change its procedure, especially in the negotiation process. So a kind of allowing or introducing qualified majority voting. So member states will be still involved in the process, but not as they are at the moment for opening and closing of each individual chapters. And then just imagine, taking in consideration the interest of all 28 or 27 member states in all of the chapters. So that's a lot of way forward. So member states can be included at the beginning, at the end of the negotiation process. They will still have a say, but the main, as much of the people and experts are saying that the whole enlargement process is very technical, then leave the Commission to do the technical work and the politics done by member states. Under the current Commission, Commissioner Hahn was responsible for issues related to European neighborhood, which was partly covered also by his colleague Federica Mogherini. This means that Commissioner Hahn was responsible for 3 different regions, including Turkey. So he had to deal with variety of issues, post-revolutionary states to Western Balkan countries. If we look at the agenda of Commissioner Hahn, a clear priority appears, and we have conducted a kind of a research on all the visits he made with official delegations in Brussels, and this will be part of a paper that we are going to publish soon, from 1st of January 2016 till February 2019. Out of 249 interactions, 111 were related to the Western Balkans. Out of 76 visits to the neighborhood, all the neighborhoods, 37 brought Commissioner Hahn to the Western Balkans, amounting to almost 50% of all the time abroad in the neighborhood. So this trend goes and continues in all the categories, and this will be also shown in the paper. If we translate this into a political energy devoted per capita, The largest region, or the southern neighborhood, amounting around 209 million inhabitants, received least attention. Then followed by the Eastern Partnership with 72 million, and then the smallest region of the Western Balkan, amounting around 18 million inhabitants, received almost the same amount of energy as the other two. So we can see a clear agenda, clear priority in the agenda of the Commissioner. So, and then I will say why it is also important to devote more attention to the Western Balkans. Turkey. Turkey is becoming increasingly out of the picture, although it is a negotiating country with the EU for a long period of time. The Commission published a report, a communication, February 2018, as a credible enlargement perspective, which explicitly devotes attention to the Western Balkan without mentioning explicitly Turkey. 2019 EPP Spitzenkandidat Weber stated that Turkey is not longer a reliable partner, and this policy of EPP, which is going to be, inescapable part of the political coalition behind the new European Commission, was projected in the most recent vote in the European Parliament on resolution on Turkey, in which EPP has tabled an amendment to the European Parliament resolution on Turkey to terminate or end completely the accession negotiation with Turkey. So this is something that has changed, because there were also other previous resolution on Turkey, but this is a fundamental change in the politics of the EPP. So what the EU must do is to give or to return the European Commission back the necessary tools to steer the process of the unification of Europe. Translated in institutional policy means creating a separate DG to deal with the enlargement, or the countries with the credible membership perspective. This can be also subject of discussion, because we are here organizing a debate with the Visegrad countries, also including some countries from the Eastern Partnership, and also kind of the IPA funds. When you compare the IPA funds to the structural funds, it's like very small, peanuts. So including these countries in the structural and cohesion fund might open, another financial perspective for these countries, and to get more attention from the EU. So if I put these two conclusions together, we need a stronger Commission to steer the finalization of the unification of process and continental unity by integrating the Western Balkan countries, and we need the Commission needs the necessary tool to do that. And finally, like my final remark, we need an EU with a political commitment that it means business in the Balkans. So punish those that do not deliver and reward those that are well on track. And I give you two specific examples. North Macedonia has resolved the bilateral issues with Greece and with Bulgaria, and have conducted reforms on a satisfactory level, which is satisfactory, and this is what the Commission is saying, to open accession negotiation. If we compare, for example, with the last country that opened accession negotiation, Serbia, I was in Brussels the day that they were given the accession negotiation, and it was actually, they were waiting for the conclusions from the External Action Service in order to decide whether to open or not. And we didn't even have a final agreement. We have just one more agreement in a plethora of other agreements that we are waiting for. And that's why we're talking about now a final agreement. So, and in the case of North Macedonia, we have a final agreement with Greece that needs to be implemented. And it will harm the process if we don't open accession negotiation. And this was more on the rewarding side. On the punishment side, Serbia has opened 4 chapters last year. And since the opening of accession negotiation in 2014, I think that it's opened approximately 16 chapters and provisionally closed 2. As a comparison, so 2014 started the accession negotiation. As a comparison, Croatia opened all the chapters and finished the negotiation in approximately 6 years. in video games jargon, what is happening to Serbia now is a slow kill. And no one is really satisfied with the situation. So either you freeze the process if Serbia does not deliver, especially on Kosovo issue, or speed up if it's doing so. However, the current behavior should stop, and the political commitment should be serious in the Balkans if EU wants to finish the job with unification of Europe. That will be. Thank you.
So I'm sure Mr. Popovsky is super happy to hear that someone wants a stronger, an even stronger commission. But nevertheless, I mean, the ultimate okay is given by member states. And member states have also played a positive role in pushing for enlargement to move ahead. I'm thinking of Greece, and only in this latest phase, because Greece has also played a not so positive role in the past, also on North Macedonia. But can Greece today, in this environment of questioning of EU enlargement, be the champion of enlargement? Can it help its neighbor? Can it help its region move closer to the EU?
So I cannot talk about the general issues. I have to talk about
You
Greece.
can.
Okay.
You can.
Okay.
But please answer that.
I'll start. Okay, I'll start with that. I would like to raise some of the more general points, but we can do that later probably. Yeah, I mean, Greece has played a mixed role when it comes to enlargement. We should not forget that it was during a period of a different Greece, different type of policy and different type of international and European confidence of Greece, and during a Greek presidency that the greatest push for the eventual accession of all Western Balkan states, all Balkan states back then, was taken in 2003 during the Greek presidency in Thessaloniki. And back then, Greece was at the forefront of the efforts to get all the countries in the region. Back then, there was Bulgaria and Romania, or not even the 10, had not joined. So it was really among those countries that were pushing forward the agenda. At the same time, Greece has never hid the fact that as a country, and I'm not speaking on personal capacity, I'm speaking on a personal capacity, but this is not necessarily something that I subscribe to, but as a formal diplomacy, foreign policy direction, Greece has never actually hid the fact that they want to use the enlargement process and the fact that Greece's membership in organizations that neighbors want to join in order to resolve bilateral disputes and problems in a favorable way. If possible, mutually favorable way. If not possible, mutually favorable way, favorable for Greece. And in fact, to make it even more complicated, it doesn't have a single policy principle on this issue. So if you follow the Greece's policy on enlargement, EU enlargement issues with all the neighboring countries, for example, Turkey, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, and Albania, Greece has followed, you can say, even more than four different policies. So with Turkey, they were totally anti-enlargement, anti-accession, until Greece decided that they want to resolve the problems with Turkey through the accession process. So then Greece switched from the anti-accession to the most pro-accession country when it comes to Turkey. With Albania, for example, Greece was always in favor of resolving the problems, but after the start of the accession negotiations. With North Macedonia, for example, resolving the name dispute became the absolute condition for starting accession negotiations, and so on and so forth. So it's not a single policy. It's several different policies by one ministry. So that was the past. What happens today? And Greece, together with North Macedonia, or more, I would say more more North Macedonia than Greece, took a bold step in the direction of resolving problems, of reconciling, something that is not very common in the Balkans. We have to admit, I mean, it's good news coming from the Balkans, not very often. And in that context, I think it is good news, of course, but it is also showing possibly an attitude that could be, in this difficult period in general about EU and about enlargement, which I would like to talk more about later, it is possibly an attitude that points towards not only the more benign policy, but also a policy towards helping the region rather than isolating the region from the integration process. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, however, about Greece is that Greece is in the region. It has a lot of interest in the region, a lot of very close relationships with the region, but also a lot of disputes with the region. So it's not a country isolated from the region that can step aside and say, yeah, we are pro-enlargement and we will help the region, and we don't have any problems. And the fact that Greece wants to resolve the problems with neighbors in the process of helping them to join the European Union has not gone away. It's still part of the mentality of the Greek political elites. There is absolute consensus among all political parties that we are using, actually, the process and our membership in order to resolve the disputes. So in that context, I would say it's probably a bit far-fetched to think that Greece can be a driver for the region. Greece still has a lot of disputes with neighbors. It still has to implement the Prespa agreement, which will be sticky. It will be there will be problems in the implementation. I mean, no question about it. There's still already now problems in the implementation. And Greece has issues, a lot of, and very different, various problems with Albania. And it's not going to be so easy to have Greece actually playing the motor, the motor engine for this integration process. Having said that, I think these days in the European Union, it's not bad to have a country that is in favor of enlargement. And I would say, generally speaking now about the EU, the problem these days is that what used to be an uncontested policy and pretty much successful policy of the EU, it's very much contested now within the EU. It's contested starting already from the bottom up, from the public opinion in key countries like Germany, like France, like Netherlands, and several others. But also increasingly, I think that this policy will become contested within the political system of EU member states. And what used to be a kind of a mainstream center-left, center-right policy, a kind of consensus of the key political actors in most EU member states. And part of this consensus was that we are interested and we want to pursue widening, not also deepening. I think we may see in the near future that this will be questioned by emerging political factors in several EU member states. So in that context, and I kind of hinted to not only hinted to the general picture of the EU, I think it's important that to have a country with its disputes, with its problems with the neighbors, with its explicit policy of actually using the enlargement process, the accession process to resolve disputes. It's important to have someone who's in favor of enlargement no matter what. And I think it's important that as many EU member states as possible remain squarely within the group of those who support one way or another enlargement and accession of Western Balkan states.
Right. So maybe some hope there. I definitely have questions, but let me open the debate to the audience. Do we have questions? Great. So can I ask you to identify yourself and say where you're working, and also direct your question to a particular person on the panel?
My name is Jelica Minić. I'm coming from the European movement in Serbia, and I would just like to add to this list of issues few things. First of all, it was stressed in the enlargement strategy from February last year, the importance of communication. And also in the documents prepared for the Sibiu Council meeting, communication had quite a lot of space. There is lack of communication, obviously, inside the European Union, but towards the Western Balkans, in the Western Balkans, it's a serious problem. And I would be happy if many of the messages from today's meeting would become visible not only in our region, but also in the EU. A second issue, we have and we had protests in the region of citizens. And the main message is we want the rule of law. How to help citizens in the region. How to get support to introducing the rule of law. Then I have to say that the EU authority credibility in the region is decreasing seriously. And we have serious problem with regional cooperation structures. For example, Southeast Europe Transport Observatory that prepared all projects for connectivity agenda in the area of transport doesn't exist now, and the transport community hasn't been established. There are two infringement procedures by energy community towards Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia. They are not obeying the rules that they accepted. We have problems with CEFTA, which is practically completely blocked, and we have a battle on the regional ground, countries that have serious bilateral problems. For example, Serbia blocked the board, the RICO work. So we have taxes that Kosovo introduced and blocked CEFTA. The problem is multilateral, involved also Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we have serious problem with this supplementary mechanism, regional cooperation in different fields that supported accession process of the Western Balkan countries. It's something new because these organizations have been much stronger and covered much more area, many more areas comparing to Visegrad Group. It's much more developed architecture in the region, keeping the region together. Although Berlin process supported that and practically used many achievements in the regional initiatives and transferred these achievements to the enlargement strategy. So from flagship initiatives, 6 of them, most of them were practically developed already in the region and in the Berlin process. So just to add to the agenda some new dimensions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who else had it? We have a question right there.
Hello, Adi Čermak from European Stability Initiative. Zoran, you mentioned that you would like Commission to be stronger, or in that sense. I was wondering whether the strength of the Commission should come from the credibility of its assessment of the countries concerned, and whether we are at this moment missing that credibility, and that everything that is happening with North Macedonia and to a certain extent with Albania is the result of loss of that credibility. Because if we look at the Commission's own assessment, what DG NIR does, we can see that actually when it comes to fundamentals and when it comes to standards in 33 chapters, Montenegro is doing as good as North Macedonia, and Serbia is doing worse or as good as Albania is doing. So that's the assessment of DG NIR itself. But when we see the political leadership of the Commission, talking about the countries concerned, and then we speak about Montenegro and Serbia being front runners, being possibly ready for membership in 2025, which doesn't reflect the assessment of the Commission. So I was wondering whether the path to stronger Commission is through more credibility to its assessment and to political leadership of that Commission to follow the assessment itself. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Hello, thank you for Georgi Bojovic, LSE. It was just a question on what Zoran was analyzing about. We did a similar analysis about the programs of the Spitzenkandidaten, not only Weber but the others. He's actually the only candidate on the elections who explicitly mentions something about enlargement/neighborhood policy, besides the other who have a general "we are for spreading the EU values beyond our borders." And the only point that he has is blocking the negotiation talks with Turkey. My question would actually be in light of what Adi was mentioning about the stronger Commission politically. There is a lot of uncertainty not only about the result of the EP elections, but also whether the Commission will keep the portfolio dedicated to enlargement, or who will be the prospective commissioner. What will be the impact of the Commission if, say, the commissioner comes from a problematic country such as Hungary? Let's not take Poland when it comes to rule of law, but it can be deeply problematic for the region if someone who promotes the enlargement within the Commission comes from the country that is not seen as the best student in the European club. So how do you assess these potential developments in the light of what you have analyzed? Thank you.
I don't see any more questions. It's gonna have
Of course, after Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia, Kosovo comes. I'm Danica Emina, I'm from Kosovo, Kosovo Center for Security Studies, and my question goes for the External Action Services. What will be the plan of the services after the new commissions, after the elections? I mean, we saw the Berlin summit. I almost got it mistaken with Berlin process, and now the upcoming summit in Paris. Is there any plan from the EU? I'm not speaking about member countries, but from the EU level, is there any plan to get the process back on track, or how is it going to be in the future? I mean, we are very keen to know, because in Kosovo at least we are very interested to keep the dialogues in the framework of the EU. But is there going to be an external action services that is going to be interested to lead the process in the future?
So unless you have a burning question, I'm going to ask the panelists to make their final comments and respond to the questions that were posed. No burning questions. So maybe we can start from the same order, and perhaps you, Mr. Popovsky, you would like to also respond to the other speakers, because there have been some controversial suggestions and comments put on the table that maybe the Commission would like to comment on.
It's part of the job. Look, I'll make three observations also picking up on some of the comments you made, not all of them, because it was a very rich menu. First, on the prospects, I mean, you asked the question, what kind of a union will these countries join? A different one. But it has always been like that. The European Union itself, and in particular the European Union legislation, the acquis, is constantly evolving. And I admit, you have a point that it was much less dynamic at the time of our accession. But of course, we also had to adapt, even when we closed the negotiations in this period that was about 18 months of ratification, we constantly had to adapt and catch up with the new acquis. And I was personally in charge of that at the Polish mission at that time, so I remember it very well. Of course, now things are moving ahead much quicker. We have defense union, for instance, or the banking union that is still shaping up. The complete overhaul of the European coast and Border and Coast Guard. I mean, there are many, many examples. So, of course, at the point in time when the accession prospect will become tangible, meaning 2-3 years, it will require a lot of homework. Has always been like that. And I take the point, of course, it's good to reach out. I don't think we can consult formally all the candidate countries on every policy proposal, even though the public consultations that we really take seriously on any policy proposal are accessible to all, not only to member states or member states based organizations. Secondly, on the Commission priorities, Commission's role, thank you very much for giving credit to Commissioner Hahn for his engagement, although I'm not completely convinced by this numerical method of yours, just counting the number of visits, but I can testify to that he's really committed. He spends a lot of time dealing with the region. He's genuinely interested. He's genuinely frustrated sometimes by the pace of reforms or some negative trends and the developments, and that will basically be a huge part of his legacy at the end of this term. I'm rather relaxed when it comes to the future. I think there is a clear case for an enlargement commissioner because you need a figurehead who's in charge. It's not my call. It's the next commission president who will decide. But I think everybody would legitimately expect a political figure to be in charge of the enlargement policy. To my mind, it can still be combined with neighborhood. It's perfectly doable. Whether the DG NEAR will survive in the current shape and form, of course, it's close to my heart, but I think it's a secondary issue. You could redo it. You could very well imagine a DG Europe, which would combine responsibilities for neighborhood, Turkey, Eastern neighborhood, Turkey, Western Balkans, and European, non-EU European countries like UK, for instance. And then the southern neighborhood would be covered by a different service. But this is, basically a technical issue. And indeed, there are two different things that you mentioned. One is the political leadership and the political judgment, and second is the Commission enlargement methodology we are very proud of. And I think it has worked. It has been in place for the last 20 years, since the Copenhagen summit, 25 years. It has been refined, and I think the feedback we get is quite positive. By the way, we reach out a lot to different organizations. So the current report that we are now putting finishing touches on, we've consulted OSCE and NATO and the Council of Europe and not only the countries in question, not Macedonia and Serbia and others, but also we get input from everyone, and then of course it's for the political masters to decide what to do with the conclusions and how to finally put them in words. If you want to make us more powerful, be my guest, but I guess the member states would hesitate to give any additional powers to any Brussels-based service. That's the sad reality, and this issue of QMV in foreign policy was raised. The Commission made a couple of very modest proposals concerning civilian CSDP missions and sanctions policies, and I remember the discussion with Hahn. He asked, can we introduce elements of QMV in the enlargement policy, and our advice was, well, let's not even try, because then we'll burn our fingers and it will do a lot of damage to policy. His motivation was absolutely correct, that sometimes it's really frustrating that we get stuck on one bilateral issue that is not worth the effort or the political damage that it may cause. Serbia, Kosovo, I'm no longer a member of the EAS, but I was, but the stalemate is not of our making. The introduction of punitive tariffs by Kosovo didn't help. And we were very clear, Ms. Mogherini, Commissioner Hahn, President Juncker, in saying that we expect these measures to be revoked so that we can go back to some kind of a civilized relationship, and which means also to be able to revive the Serbia-Kosovo dialogue. The fact that Germany and France are taking the lead, if it can help, it's perfectly fine. You know, format should follow substance. So I hope that at some point, and of course now with the transition within the European Union, it may take a little bit of time, but I hope we'll really should be able to get back to the negotiating table and find a way ahead. And finally, on money, we could have a long argument whether the instruments have delivered or not. But I think the level of funding is not the question, the main question. It is important, I agree, and that's why when putting forward the Western Balkan strategy, we propose to almost double the funding available for the Balkan countries under IPA. Exactly to narrow a little bit the gap between the pre-accession funding and the future funding under the structural funds, for instance, which caused a huge problem for many countries in 2004 or 2007. Please don't forget the issue of absorption. It is a real challenge. It is a challenge in many EU member states dealing with regional policy, and it is a challenge in this region. You know, just throwing a lot of money at a country, it's not a solution. So if the structures are there, if they deliver, if there is a clear sense of priorities, and that's what we are trying to use the Berlin process for, also to put some order in the priorities and to put the money where the mouth is, then it makes sense. But just increasing the funding, let's say for ideological reasons, I would advise against it. But where it makes sense, we are ready to do that. For instance, the Erasmus Plus, we doubled the funding. So we are going to go from 33 million to 66 million in 2 years for the countries, just for the 6 in the region, which is actually quite a lot. And hopefully there is more to come, but I don't want to preempt the ongoing discussion on the future multi-annual financial framework. Thank you.
Any last thoughts? No? You don't have to. Okay. Adelina? Zoran, you had questions.
I had. First, on George's question, I mentioned Weber because of his explicit mentioning of Turkey, or freezing, closing, ending the negotiation with Turkey. And on the other hand was the Western Balkans, but I didn't have to mention in that part. I wanted to point out about Turkey. And on Adi's question, yeah, I think the path forward is through let's say credible assessment of the progress made in the Western Balkan countries, but we also have to. So I think that, let's say, the whole credibility of the Commission was hurt after the assessment that Bulgaria and Romania were that was time for Bulgaria and Romania to enter the European Union. I think it was damaged, and I think several countries in member states somehow are reluctant on the assessment of the Commission, and they do their own missions. And I can specifically mention one, for example, that we know of, that, you know, the Netherlands are doing this kind of assessment on a very thorough basis, and they have sometimes we have seen, we have observed information and data that the Dutch have about, let's say, take a certain country in the region, better than the European Commission. But the thing is that also the Commission plays a political role. And in this political role, I think that what the Commission is trying to do is to push the countries to do more reforms. And one way of encouraging those countries is by moving them forward in the process. But what I wanted to point out in the whole discussion was that one of my colleagues from BIAPAC would say, call a spade a spade. That's about it. You have to say what's the exact situation, because people know, and if you just give a wrong assessment of the actual situation, won't help. You could not lie. You could not lie the member states, and then just the citizens of the countries involved, or the Western Balkan countries, see that there is no, that they lose hope. That they lose hope. What they see, what the normal, ordinary people from North Macedonia or elsewhere in the region see, is that actually, you know, the Commission representative coming to the countries, and what are the statements. We know that there is a lot of information and messages hidden behind the message, but this is not what the normal person, sees. And this is exactly a clear voice, what Jelica said about communication. You know, even for us, it's sometimes difficult. If we read the June's Council conclusions, is for explanatory screening, which is not even mentioned, and we don't know if it's only explanatory or includes bilateral screening or one without the other. The sentence that was used and wasn't properly communicated to the region was that the Council takes note of the Commission starting its work.
Which is not bad at all as an outcome.
Yeah, but this is the political role that it plays vis-a-vis the European Council. But this has to be properly communicated to the Western Balkan country. If it's not, then, you know, it is difficult to defend that situation. That would be my assessment.
Yanis?
I think not.
No. Okay. So I expected this panel to be fascinating.
Can I just add something?
Okay.
I think that the issue that was brought about the Spitzenkandidat and the risks is a very important question, especially for this round of European elections, because to my view, the Spitzenkandidat procedure, which seemed really like an explosion of European democracy in 2014, in 2019, it seems like a very corrupt process, because if we take into account that Mr. Weber won the Spitzenkandidaten status after he tolerated a lot of regimes and actions by especially the Hungarian government, which is against the even the values that EPP sworn in for. So it really depends on who will be the next Commission president, but there's always the risk in the current situation that the next portfolio that will be responsible for enlargement, no matter how it will be called, would be rather harmful for the process. And I think that the experiment with the political commission that Mr. Juncker promised when he was elected president has failed. The commission should step back and return to its guardian of the treaties role, to a more technical structure, because otherwise it loses credibility, as this issue was raised. We can give other examples for the loss of credibility, and this is the CVM procedure, which has tolerated, for example, Bulgaria for many years just because it is ruled by an EPP government. So an EPP-dominated commission was closing its eyes for many of the issues that are happening in Bulgaria and have been happening for quite a long time. By the way, the CVM has proved that such a mechanism, ad hoc mechanism, cannot resolve the issues with deficiencies in democracies and rule of law. So something else has to be deliberated in case we decide that enlargement is more important than some issues. So, but any other mechanism, which including for the EU, the rule of law mechanism is not working as well. So something really substantial has to be invented, and we should really, like I said, stick to the main principles and leave politics for minor things. Thank you.
Well, as someone who works with politicians, I always think in political options as coming as three. And the whole point, I think the main goal of our panel was to come up with something concrete to give to the leaders who are going to Poznan and hopefully taking the right decisions. So my three takeaways from listening to this, and I'm really summarizing here, is number one, we need the right EU tools, and these tools need to be about more genuine consultations with the countries of the region, include education on fundamental values, and a clear engagement of the countries in the region in policies that affect them directly. Number two, a strong technical assessment procedure that is carried out by the European Commission and that supports a genuinely merit-based enlargement process. And three, we still need an EU member state champion of EU enlargement, but it's not Greece. So the applications are open for some other EU member state. So on this note, I'd like you to join me in a round of applause for our speakers for such wonderful insights.
Just brief information for the upcoming cocktail reception at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.